Hey guys, it's Miss Rutledge, and well, Mrs. Roy was here. I don't know where she went.
Roar! Roar! Alright.
I found her! Oh my word! Okay, so we are starting lesson 7 and 8 of chapter 1. We're still on decimals, but now we're comparing decimals just like we compared whole numbers. So we're going to start and look at, first off, before we kind of get to this, we've already written some stuff up here. Let's remember our lovely signs that we learned way back when. I don't even know what grade we would have learned them.
Like second.
Probably. So this sign, do you know what this is, Mrs. Roy?
Well, if you pretend that I'm standing over here, and you're standing over there, right now, you are eating me. You are greater than me.
No,
greater than.
You're greater than me.
Oh man.
You're greater than me. There we go.
Right, because I'm sorry. It's from my perspective.
Yeah, because it's
whichever greater number.
Right, it's whatever is open is the bigger number. So that would be like me being way down here and Mrs. Roy being, she's greater than me currently.
Yep.
But if I was to flip it, because you always start by saying, so because this is the small part, it would be less than. And so, you know, if we did our little pictures again, then Mrs. Roy would be less than Miss Rutledge.
Another way I remember it is like if it was numbers like 15 and like 22.
Okay.
No, we got to go the other way. If it was like 15 and 12.
Okay.
I always think the bigger number gets 2 M&Ms and the smaller number gets 1 M&M.
Seems really unfair to 12.
Well, he's smaller. So 34 and 26. No, 34 and 53. 53 is bigger, 2 M&Ms. 34 is smaller, 1 M&M.
I can see that.
So he eats the bigger guy.
Yeah. Yeah, and you always read it that way. So 34 is less than, because it's smaller, than 53. Whereas this one's 15 is greater than 12. And now, last one would be, ooh, that one. What if we did this?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter?
No.
Oh. So what is the equal sign means?
What if we did that?
Ooh. It doesn't matter. Actually, you can add as many zeros as you want. It doesn't matter any time, as long as they're after the decimal. Now, if we took the decimal away, it would make a difference. Now, this is the equal sign, which is also could mean equivalent. These two numbers are equivalent, and because they're actually decimals, right now they are equivalent decimals.
And that just means that they're decimals that have the same value.
Yep.
Doesn't matter how many zeros are behind them. They're worth the same thing. Exact
Awesome.
same thing.
Okay, so now that we've had our little review lesson, we'll let Mrs. Roy take it away. Da-da-da-da-da.
All right, let's take a look at these two numbers. We've got 1 and, decimal point from the last lesson, 1 and 2/10 is how we would say that. And this is going to be the circle we're going to compare them in. We're going to either put the greater than, less than, or equal to 1 and 6/10. So we've got a number line here for you that we've already put the benchmarks in on, which are just these little lines. They're little sections. They're benchmarks. And we're going to say, okay, 1.2 would be right here. Notice how I put my dot on the line, not anywhere above it or below it, but right on the line. And 1 and 6/10 is right there. So we're looking at which one is greater. Obviously, 1 and 6/10 is greater because he is farther down on the number line. So I'm going to give him 2 M&Ms. I'm going to give this smaller guy 1, and I'm going to connect them. And if I read it, it says 1 and 2/10 is less than 1 and 6/10.
Awesome. Now, Mrs. Roy, I know that personally, I don't like using the number line every time. Sometimes it's old to draw a number line.
Yeah.
So what's another way that we can compare these two numbers without using the number line?
I think the next best way would be to line up our digits.
Ooh, okay. Do you want to show them that using our
let's go
grid?
do that. So I'm just going to start here with, can you see me?
Getting really close.
1 and 2/10. And I'm going to make sure that I put the decimal points underneath of each other. So there's my decimal points. So I have to put 1 and 6/10. I have to line up decimal points when I'm comparing. Have to. And then I'm going to say, I'm going to go digit by digit. 1 and 1, oh, they're the same. Decimal, decimal, oh, they're the same. 2 and 6. Uh-oh. 2 is definitely less than 6. So I would then put my less than sign, making sure that he gets 1 M&M and this guy gets 2 M&Ms. And then I connect them.
Awesome. I love it. Okay, now backing up. All right, going again. We are going to go ahead and look at the second problem. So on this one, they want us to compare 7.89 and 7.189. So some different numbers here. And first we're going to start with our number lines. So in between, we're in between 7 and 8 because these two numbers fall somewhere in between. They're bigger than 7, but they're not quite as big as 8. So we're going to look at this number line first.
She knew that because of her whole numbers.
Yes, those lovely numbers there. So what falls right in between 7 and 8? Well, I'm going to go ahead and label that, and that's 7.5. So I like to go ahead and kind of show myself halfway in between. From there, I know that, well, we're going to have, just like Mrs. Roy had benchmarks, I'm going to have lines that get to 7.5. So this would be 7.1.
And I went up by 1 each time. 1/10.
7.2, 7.3, 7.4. And I'm going to, I could label those, but I'm going to go ahead and look at this one because this is 7.1. So this one would be 7.1 and this one would be 7.2. So it's going to fall right in there. Now, I got to look, is it going to be closer to 7.1 or 7.2? Well, 1 and 8, oh, that's going to be right in here. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but I want it to be more on this side because it's just about to 7.2. Okay? Now, 7 and 89 hundredths is going to fall in between here. And I've got to go ahead and make my benchmarks. So 7.6, 7.7, 7.8, 7.9. So I'm going to go ahead and I've got 7.8 and 7.9. Notice I didn't label all of them, just the ones that I really needed. You want to do the benchmark lines, but I don't always think it's necessary to label them. Do you, Mrs. Roy?
Not always.
Okay, so I've got the 7 and 8 tenths, 7 and 9 tenths. 89, whew, that's going to fall right before my 7 and 9 tenths. So I've got my 2 dots on here, and I can always tell whichever one is closest to the right is going to be the bigger one. So it's going to be my 7 and 89 hundredths, whereas this one over here is 7 and 189 thousandths. Now, wait a second. 189 is bigger than 89. Well, that's kind of weird. Huh. 189 is bigger than 89. But notice that this one is actually bigger on the number line. That's because...
Remember how we can add zeros and it won't change the value?
Yep. Your tenths position is always bigger. So this one, we use the number line. We're going to go ahead and zoom.
Can I show one more thing really fast?
Yep.
Okay, think about money. So I always like to think about money because it's something you use all the time. If I'm looking at this guy and trying to decide where to put him between 7 and 1/10 and 7 and 2/10, if I think about, we don't really have 3 numbers out here to the right of our decimal in money. We always have about 2. So that 9, if I think about my rounding rules, 9 is going to make that 8 bump up. So that's about $7.19. Is $7.19 going to be closer to $7.10 or $7.20? So that kind of helps you kind of get a little bit closer. And then over here, if I were to add zeros, because I can add them on the left, on the outsides, or either outsides, to the right or to the left, and it won't change the amount. $7.89, is that closest to $7.90 or $7.80? So I know that's kind of tricky sometimes to kind of get where it's going to be closest to, but if you think about money, sometimes that'll help too.
That's awesome.
So,
I love it. Okay. So we're going to zoom in on our board over here. Whoop. All right. Now, what Mrs. Roy talked about is we always want to line up our decimal points. So I've got 7 and 89 hundredths and 7. Notice I'm lining up my decimal points. That's what we line up. And 189 thousandths. Now, what we like to do, me and Mrs. Roy both, is since there's a blank box right here, we always like to add in a 0 there to show that it could be 890 thousandths. Either one, it's the exact same thing. But that 0 holds the place, and then it allows us to compare. So if I'm looking for the greater number, I'm all of a sudden looking here. 7s are both the same, so I go to the next one. Ooh, 8 is bigger, so that automatically means that this is the greater number. And that's how we can compare them. All right, jumping back over. Kind of at an angle.
And we don't have to use Mrs. Rutledge's fancy little board. So I went ahead and drew one while she was working on that over here. And your question number 3 says that we're going to order each set of numbers from least to greatest. Be really careful about reading those directions to make sure it's least to greatest or greatest to least. So I'm going to take all of our numbers up here and I'm just going to fill them in to our boxes, making sure to line up my decimal every time. 23 and 80 hundred.
You kind of have to decide where your decimal's going to go first.
I actually put it in there first and then I do my other numbers. So I did that one, I did that one.
Because if that was just like a 3 and not 23, you would still have to leave your decimal there.
Yeah.
You
So I
wouldn't
always
move
put my
it.
decimal in. Okay, and then I go place value by place value. So I'm going to start over here clear at the left because we're ordering from least to greatest. And I've got 2, 2, 2, 2, so they're all good. 2, 3, 2, 3. So it's kind of like a game. Which one's going to be, we're going least to greatest, so which one's least out of the 2s, the 3s, the 2 or the 3? Which one's less, Ms. Rutledge?
2, and I always have to mark them then so I don't forget that those come first.
Yeah, I kind of like to cover them up like this.
Oh, yeah.
So then I've got the 2 and the 3, so I know it's down between these two guys. It's kind of like a race.
Yep.
So then I have to go on to the next place value. So I'm looking at a 6 and a 0. Well, which one's least?
Ooh, the 0.
The 0. So this guy is going to come in first place.
Yep.
Okay, he's the least. So then I need to go back to the other guy that I was comparing
Oh,
to.
but wait, that's a 2 and that's a 6. Why do we go back automatically to him?
Because it was between these two for first place.
Oh, yeah.
So since he came in first, he has to come in second.
Okay.
And then I go back and I start over from my next 3, or my third place. So 2 and 2, 3 and 3, decimal, decimal, 8 and 2.
Oh, so now that guy, he can take third place.
Third place. And this guy obviously comes in last.
All right. Now, can we just leave it in the table, or do we need to write it out?
You really need to not be lazy.
Yeah, we probably...
And write them out. So 22, and it doesn't take very long.
No, it doesn't. But do make sure you write them out on your paper.
And we actually have one that we want you guys to try to see if you can work on that at home tonight or in class, whichever one you get
Well,
the time
because,
to do.
again, notice how when Mrs. Roy put them in the boxes, she just put them in order. She didn't worry about whether or not they were in order over here. She did that by putting them in the boxes. So, again, you just put them in how you want them there, and then you can write them the correct way.
This is my final answer.
Yep, that's her final answer, so she would circle it.
Okay. All right, so make sure that you do the question, the teacher question over there, number 1, and order the numbers from greatest.
All right,
to least.
we will see you later. Rawr!